He looked me straight in the eyes, the same eyes I saw when he was born, and said, "You're no one in my life now." That was the moment my heart stopped calling him son. My name is Robert Thomas, and I am 67 years old. I live alone in a small house on the outskirts of Minnesota, where the winters are long and the nights are even longer. But nothing feels colder than what my son said to me that day. I remember it like it happened 5 minutes ago, not 5 months ago. He stood tall, confident, dressed in a sharp black coat, like the kind I bought him when he got his first job. He looked just like me when I was his age, except he had no memory of who made him this man. His name is Daniel Thomas, the only child I ever had. The only reason I worked 18 hours a day for 40 years. The only reason I stopped myself from ending it all in 1999, after his mother left us for someone richer. The only reason I learned how to cook, how to braid hair, how to say, "No, you don't need a mother when you've got a father like me." And now, I'm no one. I first met Daniel on a snowy evening in December 1989. He was wrapped in a blue blanket, crying so loud I thought the hospital walls might collapse. But the nurse put him in my arms, and in that exact moment, he stopped crying. Just like that, as if he knew he had arrived in the safest place in the world. I looked at his face, so small, so perfect, so mine. "Hi, son," I whispered. "You're home now." That was the happiest day of my life, and ever since then I had only one job: never let that smile leave his face. When Daniel turned 5, I made him pancakes in the shape of stars. When he turned 8, I sold my guitar to buy him a bicycle. When he turned 13, I drove Uber at night to pay for his school trip to Boston. When he turned 16, I bought him his first used car while I walked to work every day. And when he turned 23 and said he didn't want to be an engineer like I hoped, but a photographer, I only smiled and said, "Son, as long as you're happy, I'm proud of you." But he forgot all that. He forgot everything. Open quote. Subscribe to Letters from Pain if you've ever loved someone more than they loved you back. Close quote. The fight started over something small. He called me one afternoon, asking for my signature on a property document. It was the house. The one I built with my hands. The one where his baby pictures still hang on the wall. The one where his mother left us, and I kept the light on for her until I realized she was never coming back. "Just sign it, Dad. It's for legal transfer. Nothing changes." "But transfer to who?" I asked. "To me." I stayed quiet for a while, and then I asked the question I never thought I'd have to ask my own son. Are you planning to sell this house?" He didn't answer. That silence said everything. 3 days later, he arrived with papers in hand. "Dad, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. It's just property." "Just property?" I laughed softly. "This is your childhood. Your mother's last photo is on that wall. This is your everything." "No," he said coldly. "You think it's everything. To me, it's just a house with too many memories." I didn't cry that day. I didn't beg. I simply looked at him and remembered the night he got his first fever and I stayed up for 40 hours straight. I remembered the time I spent 2 winters building this house, brick by brick, so he wouldn't have to rent like I did all my life. I remembered the birthday when I gave him my mother's ring, telling him, "This is yours now, pass it to your son one day." And now, I wasn't even worth a memory. I was just no one. Open quote. If you've ever been called nothing by someone you raised with love, then subscribe to Letters from Pain. Close quote. The night he left, I didn't sleep. I took every photo of him from the shelves and placed them in a box. I removed the frame that said Number 1 Dad from the living room wall. I stood outside the house and looked at it from the street. And I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to fight him in court. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't even going to write him a letter. I was going to erase myself from everything I built for him. The next morning, I went to the local bank. I closed the joint account we had since he was 17. Then I walked into the city hall and I changed my will. Everything, the house, the land, the savings, even the vintage coins he loved, I left them to a charity. Children who never had fathers, because maybe they'd value a stranger more than my own son valued me. 2 weeks later, Daniel called me. "Dad, I got a legal notice that the house belongs to a shelter foundation now. Is this some kind of joke?" I said nothing. "You said you'd never do anything to hurt me." That's when I finally spoke. Neither did I think you'd forget who I was. He stayed silent. Then he said the last thing he's ever said to me till today. You're no one in my life now. And so I became no one, but a very dangerous kind of no one, the kind who knows everything about you, but now has nothing left to lose. There's something terrifying about silence. Not the kind that comes after a fight, but the kind that comes when someone you raised forgets you ever existed. Close quote. After Daniel's last words, "You're no one in my life now," I sat alone on the porch of the house I had just given away. It didn't feel like defeat. It felt like liberation. For the first time in 35 years, I wasn't tied to anyone. No expectations, no responsibilities, no illusion of love that could be sold off with a signature. I was just Robert, and strangely, that felt enough. I spent the next days in complete silence. No calls, no texts, no visitors. I cooked small meals. I watched the birds land on the fence like they always had. But now, I looked at them differently. They didn't cling, they didn't stay, they came, they left, and no one owed anyone anything. Maybe love should have been like that too. One evening, I received a letter, not from Daniel, but from his wife. Open quote, "If your silence ever made someone nervous, then subscribe to Letters from Pain." Close quote. The envelope was expensive. Her name, Maya Thomas, was written in neat cursive. We'd never been close. She always called me Mr. Thomas, never Dad. The letter was short. Open quote, "Robert, I don't know what happened between you and Daniel, but whatever it is, please know it's hurting him deeply. He may not admit it, but I see it in his eyes every day. He doesn't sleep, he doesn't smile, he just stares at his old photos with you. Maybe one day you two will fix this. Until then, please, don't disappear. Maya." Close quote. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, right beside my passport and will. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't know how to explain to her that some wounds don't bleed. They rot quietly. Days passed, then weeks. No calls, no birthdays, no "How are you, Dad?" Just silence. And so I made a choice. I packed 2 suitcases, sold my pickup truck, and left town. I moved to a small coastal village in Oregon. Quiet, foggy, peaceful. No memories, no photographs. Just the ocean, the cold air, and me. I rented a wooden cabin near the shore, the kind with a squeaky door and a fireplace that didn't always work. But I didn't mind, because I was finally somewhere Daniel's voice couldn't reach me. One morning, as I watched the waves crashing against the rocks, I began writing again. Yes, writing. I used to write poems once, before life became about bills and survival. Now I wrote about fathers. Fathers who loved too deeply. Fathers who stayed too long. Fathers who lost their names. Open quote, "He called me no one." But that's where I began. Not as a father, not as a man, just silence, wrapped in pain. Close quote. I sent my writing anonymously to a small online journal called Letters from Pain, a place for people like me, people who had been erased. They published my story the next week. I watched the comment section fill with tears. "This sounds like my dad. I'm crying at work. Why are sons so cruel to the people who built their world?" And for the first time in years, I felt heard. Open quote, "If your pain ever found its way into someone else's heart, then subscribe to Letters from Pain, because we write for those who are never written about." Close quote. One cold morning, I got a letter again, this time with no return address. But I knew that handwriting. It was Daniel's. Open quote, "Dad, I saw your story. I knew it was you. I didn't know how much I broke you, and now I'm breaking too. I'm sorry I said what I did. I was angry, confused, lost, and somehow I made you carry the weight of all my failures. Can I see you? Just once, please. Daniel." Close quote. I stared at that letter for a long time. My hands trembled, my eyes didn't cry, but my bones did. Could a broken thing love again? Could I? I didn't send a reply. Instead, I lit the fireplace, tore the envelope into pieces, and sat there staring at the flames, wondering, was I a bad father? Or was I just a father who finally stopped begging to be remembered? I didn't know the answer, but I knew one thing. I was no longer afraid of being no one, because now, no one was free. A son can forget a father, but a father never forgets what it felt like the day his child said, "You don't exist to me anymore." I became invisible, but I also became something stronger. Untouchable. Close quote. I stayed in that wooden cabin for 6 months. Oregon's coast was rough but honest. Waves came, waves crashed, but at least they never lied to me. Unlike my son. Daniel's letter haunted me, not because he apologized, but because I didn't know whether he meant it. When someone tells you that you're no one, it doesn't go away with a single sorry. It stains your bones. I started walking 5 miles every morning, not for exercise, but to remember who I was before being a father. You know what's strange? I had no answer, because I never had a life of my own. My whole existence was tied to Daniel, his school, his meals, his soccer games, his dreams. I was never Robert. I was Daniel's dad. So when he erased me, I didn't just lose my son, I lost me too. One foggy morning, I reached a cliff overlooking the Pacific. I stood there for almost an hour, watching, breathing, breaking, and then I did something I never thought I would. I took out a pen and began to write a letter to Daniel. Open quote. If you've ever written a letter you'll never send. Subscribe to Letters from Pain. Close quote. Open quote. Dear Daniel, you were 5 when you first tied my shoelaces. You were 11 when you called me your hero. You were 16 when you hugged me in public and didn't care what your friends thought. And you were 33 when you looked into my eyes and said I was no one. You see, son, pain isn't just about what you did. It's about all the things you forgot, the sacrifices, the stories, the little moments that only a father remembers. I won't ask you to come back. I won't ask you to apologize again, because I don't need anything from you anymore. I just want you to remember, no matter how far you go, you are the only story I'll ever carry to my grave. Dad. Close quote. I folded the letter, put it inside a book I kept under my bed and locked it away. Some words are meant to be written, not sent. The days passed like waves. Then one night something strange happened. A knock at my door. No one ever came here. No deliveries, no friends, no neighbors. I opened it slowly, and there he was. Daniel. But he didn't look like my son. He looked like a man swallowed by regret. His beard was longer, his eyes sunken, his hands shook slightly. Dad, he whispered. I didn't say a word. I stepped back and let him in. We sat by the fire. Silence filled the room like smoke. Then he spoke. I sold the house, after all, he said quietly, but I didn't want to. I stayed still. Things got bad, Dad, real bad. I lost my job, Maya left, I owed people money. His voice cracked. I was ashamed, so I blamed you. He started crying. Not the kind of tears that demand forgiveness, but the kind you cry when you realize you became the villain in your own father's story. He reached into his coat and pulled something out, the number 1 Dad frame. Broken glass, dusty, but still there. I kept this, he said, even when I said you meant nothing. I took it from his hand, held it gently. Why now? I finally asked. He looked up at me, because I miss being someone's son. Open quote. If you've ever waited for someone to finally say what you needed to hear, subscribe to Letters from Pain. Close quote. I wanted to scream. I wanted to say, now you miss it? Now? But I didn't, because the only thing heavier than betrayal is the hunger to forgive. We talked until sunrise. He told me everything, the lies, the pressure, the mental breakdowns, the shame, and I listened, not because I had to, but because that's what fathers do. Even when they've been erased, they listen. By the end of it, he was asleep on the couch, curled like he used to as a boy, and for a brief moment I saw my son again. Not the man who hurt me, not the stranger who took everything, just my boy. I made coffee the next morning, left it beside him and wrote a note. Open quote. Daniel, I don't know where we go from here, but you can stay for as long as you need, Dad. Close quote. That's all I had the strength for. Not a grand reunion, not a miracle healing, just space. And sometimes space is more powerful than words. He slept like a boy that morning. No guilt, no pride, just breath and silence. And I stood by the doorway, holding a coffee mug in one hand, wondering, how does a father let his son return without asking for anything back? Close quote. Daniel stayed in my cabin for 4 days. He didn't ask to, and I didn't offer, but neither of us said the word leave. There was a quiet rhythm to it. He would wake late, sit outside, stare at the ocean, then come back in and ask, can I help with dinner? He never said I love you. I never said I forgive you. But pain doesn't always speak in complete sentences. Sometimes it just lives between the pauses. On the 3rd night, I woke up and saw the lights still on in the living room. Daniel was sitting by the fireplace holding a photo album, the one I had packed away long ago. He was flipping pages like they might disappear. I watched from the hallway, silent. Then I heard it, the smallest sound from his lips. God! What did I do? Open quote. If you've ever whispered regret into a dark room, subscribe to Letters from Pain, close quote. I walked in, sat beside him, and said nothing. We stared at a photo of him riding on my shoulders. His tiny arms wrapped around my head, his face full of laughter, mine full of exhaustion and joy. He looked at me, eyes red, lips tight. Dad, did I ruin everything? I answered with the truth. No, but you did forget everything. We both stared at the fire again, the logs cracking softly, the kind of sound that reminds you how warm something can feel before it turns to ash. I want to make it right, he said. And this time, I believed him, but I didn't know how. The next day, Daniel went into town, said he wanted to find something. I didn't ask. He came back carrying a box and a brown paper folder. He handed them to me without speaking. Inside the box, every photograph, trophy, school paper, letter and birthday card I had ever given him. All of it, saved. Even the old blue baby blanket from the hospital. Inside the folder, a legal document. He had transferred the house back to my name. I want you to have it again, he said. I'll never live in it, not after what I did, but you should. I closed the folder slowly. You really think this fixes it? No, he said. I just think maybe it can be where we start over. I didn't smile, I didn't cry, but something in me shifted. For the first time since he told me I was no one, I started feeling like someone again. We spent the evening going through old things, laughing softly, hurting louder inside. He found a drawing he made at age 6, stick figures, one tall, one small, holding hands. It said, me and Daddy, best friends forever. He stared at it for a long time, then looked at me. Can we get that back? I placed a hand on his shoulder. We can try. Open quote, if you've ever chosen to rebuild with the same hands that were broken, subscribe to Letters from Pain, close quote. On the 5th morning, Daniel left. Not out of anger, not out of shame, but with purpose. I want to fix things with Maya. Maybe even find work again. I nodded. Just don't disappear this time. He looked at me, the way he used to when he was a boy. I won't, Dad. Before he left, he handed me a small notebook. Something I've been writing. You gave me the words. I just borrowed them. That night, I sat by the fire and opened it. The first page read, open quote, to the father I tried to forget, but who never forgot me. Close quote. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was hurt, but because, for the first time in years, I wasn't alone. I don't know if you've ever sat in a room so silent that your own breath starts to sound like thunder. That's what it was like after Michael stormed out. I could hear the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. The echo of his words hadn't left the walls yet. You're no one in my life now. That night I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I didn't cry. I just sat, staring at the door like a man waiting for a ghost to return. 2 days later, I finally opened the safe and took out the papers. Property, investments, savings accounts, everything I had worked for. Not for me, but for him. All of it had his name, and I had made sure of it. But now I was no one. I made the decision, the kind no parent should ever have to make. I called my lawyer. Remove my son's name from everything, I said, my voice flat and lifeless. Are you sure, Mr. Daniels? He asked. I didn't blink. Yes, I want a new will, a new beneficiary. I want him erased. That's the night I stopped being a father, not because I wanted to, but because I wasn't allowed to be one anymore. Subscribe to Letters from Pain if you've ever had to let go of the very person you lived for. I moved to a smaller apartment, no garden, no backyard, no family photos on the walls. I packed them all away, one by one, and the strange thing was, it didn't hurt. Not in that moment. The pain came slowly like water dripping in an empty sink. A small sound, but it never stopped. Months passed. My phone never rang, my door never knocked, and the man who used to be called Dad now only existed in memories no one else seemed to want. I volunteered at a shelter just to hear another human voice. I started bringing food to people I didn't know just to feel useful again. But at night, when I came home and turned the key, silence swallowed me whole. One day a letter came in the mail, no return address, no name on the envelope, just a few sentences inside. Open quote, you didn't understand. You still don't. But maybe one day you will, or maybe not. Close quote. I read it 10 times, 20, 100, trying to find a trace of regret, but all I felt was the cold. My hands shook as I folded it and put it in a drawer. I didn't know if it was a goodbye or a warning. I just knew it wasn't an apology. The days turned into weeks, and the silence between me and Michael grew heavier. Each morning I woke hoping for a message, a call, anything, but nothing came. The home that once echoed with laughter now felt like a hollow shell. I wandered the empty rooms, touching memories frozen in time. One rainy afternoon, as I sat in a small cafe in downtown Minneapolis, I overheard a conversation between two men at the next table. They spoke about a community program for fathers and sons trying to mend broken bonds. The words struck me like a lifeline. For the first time, a glimmer of hope broke through the gloom. I decided to attend. The room was filled with faces marked by pain, regret, and longing, just like mine. The stories shared reminded me that I was not alone, that broken relationships could sometimes be healed. Slowly, I began to rebuild myself. I found strength in the stories of others and shared mine too. The healing was not instant and the path was rocky, but every step forward brought me closer to peace. Then one evening as I returned home, I found an envelope slipped under my door. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was from Michael. Inside was a letter, raw and honest, filled with apologies and a plea to meet and start over. Tears blurred my vision as I read, realizing that maybe, just maybe, this story wasn't over. Months passed since that letter from Michael. I kept it close, reading and rereading it when loneliness threatened to swallow me whole. But healing is not a straight path. It's more like a river, sometimes calm, sometimes crashing. We arranged to meet at a small park near the lake where I used to take him as a child. The air was crisp, and the early autumn leaves danced around us. When Michael arrived, he looked older, tired, carrying the weight of years apart. His eyes met mine, hesitant but hopeful. We sat on a bench, and for the first time in a long time, words flowed, not accusations or anger, but stories. Stories of pain, mistakes, regrets, and love that refused to die. He told me about his struggles, the pressure he felt, his failures, and how ashamed he was to reach out. I shared my own loneliness, my fears, and how much I missed being his father. The conversation wasn't perfect, but it was a start. We agreed to try again, to rebuild from the broken pieces. As we parted that day, I realized that even shattered things can be mended with time and patience. The day I saw Michael at that park, something inside me shifted, something I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just relief or hope. It was the slow, steady rebuilding of a father's heart cracked wide open, battered by time and silence, but still beating. We sat on that cold bench, surrounded by falling amber leaves, and spoke as if we were strangers trying to remember who we once were. The wind carried our words, sometimes heavy, sometimes light, but always honest. Michael told me about the nights he lay awake, haunted by guilt and regret, how he blamed himself for pushing me away, how the weight of anger and pride almost crushed him. He told me he never forgot the sacrifices, the late-night drives, the patched-up clothes, the birthday surprises, the quiet tears he never saw. I told him about the loneliness that swallowed me whole when he walked out, how I felt invisible, like a ghost in my own home, how I nearly gave up but held on to the hope that someday he would see me again. We talked for hours, no shouting, no blame, just two broken men trying to piece together a story that had fallen apart. And then Michael did something I never expected. He took my hand. His grip was weak but sincere. "Dad," he whispered, "I want to be in your life, not as someone who remembers only pain, but as your son, the one you always believed in." I choked back tears I had buried for decades. "I want that too, son, more than anything." The journey wasn't easy after that day. Forgiveness is not a switch you flip. It's a path you walk, step by careful step. We went to therapy sessions together, talked to old friends, revisited places filled with memories, some good, some painful. Each conversation peeled back layers of hurt and misunderstanding. We learned to listen without judgment, to speak without anger, and slowly the space between us filled with something new. Trust. Months later, Michael invited me to his home. A modest place, but warm. His wife, Maya, greeted me with cautious kindness. We shared dinner, laughter, the kind of moments I thought I'd never have again. That night, as I lay in the guest room, I felt something I hadn't in years, belonging. Time passed, and we rebuilt our bond brick by brick. I became a grandfather, watching my grandson's eyes light up as I told him stories of his father's childhood. Michael and I still had hard days, but now we faced them together. I removed my name from everything when I thought I was losing him forever. But now, with his hand in mine, I realize a father's love isn't about ownership or possession. It's about presence, being there when it hurts. Being there when it heals, being there when it's messy and imperfect. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't about winning, it's about never giving up. Open quote. If your heart has ever been broken by someone you loved most, then subscribe to Letters from Pain, where every wound is heard and every scar tells a story. Close quote. This is my story, my pain, my healing, and it's far from over. Thank you for listening.